Illinois is suing the Trump administration. The Trump administration is suing Illinois. Governor J.B. Pritzker is trying to beat back the threat of a trade war. And Republicans walk out of the Illinois House while Democrats pass resolutions condemning everything that's been going on. From Capital News, Illinois, I'm Peter Hancock. It's Friday, February 7th, and this is Capital Cast. Hello and welcome to Capital Cast, a regular podcast of Capital News, Illinois. The big news out of Springfield this week has been watching the Illinois state government respond to what's happening in the federal government, and in particular, what's coming out of the Trump administration. Lawsuits over immigration policy, threats of a trade war with Canada and Mexico, and passionate debates over symbolic resolutions in the Illinois House. That's just a taste of what's been going on, and here to help explain some of that are two of my colleagues, CNI reporter Ben Szalinski. Ben, thanks for being here.
Hi, Peter.
And Jade Aubrey, one of our public affairs reporting program interns from the University of Illinois Springfield. Jade, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Peter.
So in reverse chronological order, let's start with what was happening today. Governor Pritzker held one of those events. It's fairly common for a governor celebrating a business expansion that was made possible with some economic development incentives from the state. This was at a firm called Friedman Seating in Chicago, which is a firm that makes the seats that you sit on in buses. Jade, you helped cover that event. Tell us a little bit of what was happening there.
Yeah, so today, Governor Pritzker announced that the Friedman Seating Company is investing $4 million into their Chicago-based facility. This comes with their partnership with the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, and also they received the state's EDGE funding, which is a state tax credit that goes to Illinois-based businesses that create full-time jobs in Illinois. This $4 million investment is going to create 50 full-time jobs and also retain almost 700 full-time jobs the plant has created. And it's also going to update their almost 100-year-old facility. Besides that, Pritzker took this press conference as an opportunity to criticize President Trump's proposed tariffs on imports on Canada and Mexico. He said that he spoke to U.S. ambassadors from both countries this week and informed them that Illinois does not want the tariffs. He said he's hopeful that these conversations will stop Canada and Mexico from retaliating against Illinois and products made and shipped out of Illinois. He also called the Trump administration's recent crackdown with ICE and the lawsuit they filed against Illinois as distractions from what he called the bigger picture. He was referring to the proposed tariffs and the short pause on Medicaid that occurred during the federal funding freeze.
Okay, let's listen to a little bit of what he said during those remarks.
It's bad for Illinois. It's bad for the country. It's detrimental for a company like Friedman Seating, which can only acquire certain of its parts that it has as inputs from Mexico, and it sells its products into Canada. And so I want Friedman and all of our Illinois businesses to thrive, and that's why I'm doing everything I can to oppose these tariffs and to reduce their negative impact.
Ben, let's turn to you because you wrote a little bit about the trade war specifically earlier in the week. What are the implications of this for Illinois, especially if there are retaliatory tariffs from Canada and Mexico against the stuff that we send them? How much is at stake in a trade war like this?
In short, just like every other American, Illinois residents would be susceptible to price hikes because the businesses that are going to have to pay these tariffs to send goods into the United States and into Illinois are more than likely going to pass off the cost of these tariffs on to consumers. So this really would affect upwards of $100 billion worth of goods that annually get imported to Illinois from Canada, Mexico, and China. Now, of course, we know as right now, China is the only country that did get a tariff put onto them. That was a 10% tariff. But this really could have a lot of far-reaching effects for Illinois residents, especially on certain goods. Coming out of China, computers and electronics is obviously one of the most important goods that we receive from that country. That's worth $27 billion in annual shipments that the state receives from China every year just on computers. But more strikingly, I think, from what I found when I was looking into this story was how much Illinois receives from oil and gas every year from Canada. Illinois imports about $47 billion worth of oil and gas from our northern neighbor into the state every year. So we're highly dependable on it. But that number is huge, not just because it's $47 billion, but because that number far outweighs any other country that we receive goods from here in the state of Illinois. So tariffs on Canada would certainly mean higher energy and gas prices for Illinois residents.
And so where does this stand right now? I know that as of last weekend, everybody was saying the tariffs with Canada and Mexico were going to go into effect almost immediately. They seem to have gotten put on hold. Where do we stand at this moment?
Yeah, President Trump has decided that he's going to pause implementing these tariffs for at least the next 30 days or so up until early March. He reached some deals regarding border security with both Canada and Mexico that he felt was good enough to allow him to pause these tariffs. I think what everyone in Illinois is going to be watching for, as Jade was alluding to, is what's going to happen if these tariffs are put into place and what's going to be the effect on Illinois businesses that have strong relationships with both of these countries.
So that's where we stand on the trade war front. Meanwhile, there was some additional legal back and forth between the state and the Trump administration. Early on, almost immediately after Trump was sworn in to his second term, he issued an executive order that purported to try and put an end to what's called birthright citizenship. That's something from the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution that says people who are born in the United States are citizens of the United States and of the states in which they live. Trump tried to put an end to that. Attorney General Kwame Raoul joined litigation with some other states in a federal lawsuit in Seattle to block the executive order. He won a national temporary restraining order this week from that judge in Seattle. But at the same time, Trump's Justice Department sued the state of Illinois over what it considers to be the state's sanctuary laws, not only laws with the state, but also the city of Chicago and Cook County. These are laws that limit the ability of local law enforcement to cooperate with the feds on certain kinds of immigration enforcement actions. Governor Pritzker was asked about that at the event in Chicago on Friday, and let's listen to what he had to say there.
I mean, unlike Donald Trump, we follow the law in Illinois. Now, maybe they put up with this kind of garbage in Florida, which is the home state of the head of the DOJ. But in Illinois, we have grit, we are tough, we are strong, and Donald Trump has no idea what he's up against when he attacks Illinois.
Ben, that sounds vaguely familiar to the rhetoric that Governor Pritzker was using immediately after Donald Trump was elected back in November. I think you remember him saying words to the effect of, "If you come after the people of Illinois, you have to come through me." Almost very aggressive, sort of combative stance that he's been taking with the Trump administration. That seems to be continuing. He doesn't seem to be abating that any. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's along the same lines that the governor has been going on that you rightly point out there, I think. This is probably just going to be a continuing drama for the next 4 years where the governor is constantly hitting back at Donald Trump, other states where conservatives are governors, at some of these various cabinet nominees who we assume are going to serve in the administration for at least a number of years. I think the striking thing here is that there's been such little communication between the state of Illinois and the high-ranking officials in the Trump administration, specifically at the White House. And all these political barbs are being traded, and that's really the only communication that we're seeing. So it certainly just leads to a really tense relationship, and it's clearly not going to be going anywhere anytime soon, especially as I think some people believe that Governor Pritzker does have higher ambitions in 4 years when 2028 comes around.
Okay, and so all of this started boiling over in the Illinois House earlier this week. On Wednesday, the House debated a series of resolutions condemning the Trump administration for all kinds of actions that it had taken. When these resolutions came up for debate, the House Republican caucus called for a timeout, asked for a caucus meeting so they could go back and talk in private about what their strategy was going to be. And then they didn't come back. They essentially staged a walkout of the House, leaving Democrats by themselves in the House to make speeches about these resolutions and to pass them all without any Republican votes either for or against them. These were resolutions that included condemning the administration for pardoning the January 6, 2021 insurrectionists, the attempts to end birthright citizenship, the threats of trade wars, the immigration enforcement efforts, pretty much everything the Trump administration has been doing in the opening weeks. And that led to Illinois House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch taking to the floor to condemn the House Republicans for not showing up. Let's listen to what he had to say.
They're not here to talk about what's coming out of Washington, D.C. What's coming out of Washington, D.C. can be summed up in one word: fascism. 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 They should be here to speak out against fascism.
That was House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch. Meanwhile, outside the House chamber, the House Republicans were holding their own impromptu news conference in the rotunda, and that's when we heard Assistant Minority Leader John Cabello addressing reporters, talking about their position of what House Democrats were doing.
The resolutions brought forward today in the Illinois House showcase the lack of effort of the majority party to focus on improvements for families across the state that our families desperately need.
So that was John Cabello essentially saying that House Democrats were not focusing on the real issues affecting Illinois, essentially changing the subject away from Donald Trump back to bread and butter issues like inflation and taxes in the state of Illinois and the state of the economy. Ben, what do you think of that? I mean, do they have a point? Were the Democrats really just grandstanding and avoiding the issues that are really front and center for Illinois?
Yeah, I think they do have a point that, these are federal issues. These are things that the Illinois House of Representatives has no control over. These are really symbolic resolutions at the end of the day. The House had no business. We're working on. They've held no committees so far. There was no outstanding legislation. The Republican argument is they should be actually working on substantive legislation in committees at this time of year. But there was nothing there for Democrats to do this week. So I think they thought this was a good opportunity to do some political grandstanding, where it's not exactly taking away from business later on in the year, for example. But it will be really interesting, I think, to see if this stuff sort of happens again as more executive orders and more policies by the Trump administration come out. I certainly think the Republicans will increasingly become frustrated by any more attempts like this.
Well, we'll just have to sit back and watch over the next couple of weeks to see whether or not the Illinois versus Trump administration battles continue, or if the legislature is actually going to turn its attention to state legislative matters in the near future. In the meantime, that will do it for this edition of Capital Cast. Capitol Cast is a production of Capital News Illinois, a public affairs reporting project of the Illinois Press Foundation with significant funding from the Robert McCormick Foundation. Until next time, this is Peter Hancock on behalf of the entire Capital News Illinois team saying thank you for listening.